Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax. And we have to declare independence for it. And the reality is, the anti-carbon agenda is the wet blanket on our economy. And so the reality is, more people are dying of bad climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
One of your key campaign pillars is raising the voting age to 25 with a civics test or military service in order to maintain the age 18 voting age.
So my premise is this. Every young kid who graduates from high school should be able to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country.
Amen.
At the age of 18, let's attach civic duties to civic privileges. And I say that minimal duty is either knowing something about the country, the exact same things an immigrant has to know, or else serve the country in some minimal way, first responder role or in the military. Part of reaching young people isn't just pandering by telling them what in the short term they want to hear, satisfying their moral hunger by saying, go and, what the left says, go to Ben & Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some social justice sprinkles on the side. No, that's not how we satisfy the hunger for purpose and meaning. I think the revival of actual civic duty is a big part of how we feed that hunger for purpose. Citizenship means something to me. And if we make it mean something to young Americans, they'll be much less drawn to secular cults from wokeism to climatism than they are today, because they actually believe that the fact that they're a citizen of the United States of America actually means something to them. And it will unite the country in the process.
I'm personally pansexual, so I was just wondering what your views on same-sex couples were.
I don't have a negative view of same-sex couples, but I do have a negative view of a tyranny of the minority. So I think that in the name of protecting against a tyranny of the majority, and there are times in this country's history where we have had a tyranny of the majority, we have now, in the name of protecting against tyranny of the majority, created a new tyranny of the minority. And I think that that's wrong. I don't think that somebody who's religious should be forced to officiate a wedding that they disagree with. I don't think somebody who is a woman who's worked really hard for her achievements should be forced to compete against a biological man in a swim competition. I don't think that somebody who's a woman that respects her bodily autonomy and dignity should be forced to change clothes in a locker room with a man. That's not freedom, that's oppression.
I'm going to read you a quote, actually. I'm going to read you a quote from the Constitution. I brought it with me just for you guys because it relates to the speech here I'm about to give you. Here's the quote. No authority has the right to infringe upon political independence or the right to abrogate individual freedoms. Sounds pretty good. That is a quote from Article 9 of the Constitution of Iran. Iran has 177 articles in their Constitution. We have 10 amendments in our Bill of Rights. They have 177 of them. But you know what they don't have? They don't have a Second Amendment, which means you don't get any of those out of 177 either. They banned their citizens from owning guns. That's how it works in Iran. That's not just an exception. Let me read you a quote from a different constitution of a different nation. The unlawful detention or deprivation of freedom is prohibited. The unlawful search of persons of citizens is prohibited. Too bad that's from the Constitution of China, which will tell you that they offer the same freedoms they do here in the United States. But you know what the difference is? In China, they don't have a Second Amendment. They ban their citizens from owning a gun. That is what makes America's Bill of Rights a reality rather than just an American dream. It is the fact that we have a Second Amendment that gives teeth to every one of the other amendments in that Constitution. In God we trust, they said. It's on the bottom of our coins. It's on the bottom of our dollar bills for a reason, because when we say in God we trust, that means that in government we distrust. That is what it means to be American. That is who we are. We are the explorers. We are the pioneers. And you want to stop Xi Jinping from invading Taiwan? Put a gun in every Taiwanese household. Have them defend themselves. Let's see what Xi Jinping does then. That is what it means to be an actual American. Train them how to use guns.
To win the Republican nomination for president, who would you choose for VP and why?
Thank you. So I haven't yet made a decision on that, but I would give strong consideration to even thinking unconventionally. Even someone like RFK Jr., for example, who's running for the Democratic nomination. I think we live in a moment where we can unite this country. Okay, Ronald Reagan did it in 1980, winning in a landslide election. I think there's an opportunity to win in a landslide election in 2024. And I think that's the single most uniting thing we could deliver in our politics. And that's the way I'm going to be thinking, not even as a Republican, but as a member of the pro-American movement. People who want to speak truth and do it unapologetically, can even disagree on some of the small details, but are committed to those basic principles. That is why I'm in this race, to rediscover our shared national identity. And that will go for the vice president to everyone I select in my cabinet as well. We're going to restore truth, and we're going to restore our American national identity. That's what we have an opportunity to do. And that's the way I'll be thinking about the vice presidency.
Thank you.
We have 3 branches of government. It's actually pretty simple. It's enshrined in a readable document cover to cover. I do it from time to time. The U.S. Constitution, something that we've forgotten, maybe needs to be taught in high school. I personally think every high school student should have to pass the same civics test that an immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. Young people don't know anything about what that flag represents. Many of them, that's when you don't know what it represents, it's why you bend the knee to a trans flag instead of the flag of the United States of America.
Yeah.
Teachers, there's actually a sad story of a teacher recently who removed the flag of the Pledge of Allegiance and put the trans flag up instead as the kids in the classroom pledged allegiance to it. But that's because when the symbols themselves lose their meaning, we got to restore the meaning for the symbols to actually mean something back. And so you have a bunch of generalists who are ineffective at their jobs because the FBI is this generalist institution. When what I would say is those 15,000, after we shut down the FBI, still have a job in the federal government. We're just going to move them to either the U.S. Marshals or the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, or the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, where they will, by the way, have greater specialization. At agencies, those 3 agencies have not been politically corrupted in the same way the FBI has and carry out their work. That's 15,000 of the 35,000. The other 20,000, they're really the true bureaucrats. And that's the source of the politicization. That's the source of the rot. It's almost not even their fault because if you have, it's just a law of human nature. This happens at the U.S. Federal Reserve too, which I can talk about in a second. When you have a bunch of people who are showing up to work who should have never had that job in the first place, the biggest problem isn't just their headcount costs. That's a problem too. But it's the fact that when they're supposed to show up to, when they show up to work when they're not supposed to, they find things to do. Right? That's actually more damaging. So those 20,000 people are going to be sent home and they have to find honest work in the private sector. Truth is, we have more private sector jobs today than we do have people in this country. So this could be good for our economy, good for lifeblood. It might even be good for them to get back into the real world, understand what honest work looks like. I would end a lot of the executive orders that we have inherited as a burden, as an albatross from prior presidents. I actually pushed Trump's people on this. Why didn't you rescind Executive Order 11246? That was the one that Lyndon Johnson signed that requires any government contractor, that's over 20% of the U.S. workforce working for a government contractor, anybody who does business with the federal government, to adopt race-based quota systems in their hiring. All it takes is a president with a pen, draw a line through that old executive order. That isn't ruling by fiat. That is fixing the rule by fiat that came in the past. Many of these from Biden, from Obama, some from Bill Clinton as well. Take a line, cross it straight through. Jimmy Carter had some awful ones. Lyndon Johnson had the worst ones of all. That's something that I'm focused on early on in the presidency. Replacement for Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I get that appointment power in January 2026. Have that lined up with plans of reform of the U.S. Federal Reserve. What I've said is I, as the leader of the executive branch, if I'm elected, if I, as the leader of the executive branch, cannot work for the taxpayer and collect a paycheck for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. Forget the civil service protections. It's an 8-year norm for most positions. Are there going to be some exceptions? Fine. But the norm, our HR policy, the norm, is that it's 8 years. No more than 8 consecutive years working in that position. That is how you suck the lifeblood out of the deep state. Send people back to find honest work in the private sector. How you create a culture of service for people who actually serve in that role too. Now, I think we only need 25% of the employees that we actually have there. So that's a lot smaller number of roles to fill anyway. People say, how will you fill all those roles? Well, here's the answer. We're only going to have a quarter of those roles left in the first place. But that is how you drive generational change that I've written. So in Woke Inc., the first book that I wrote, one of the ideas that I threw out there was to say that if we're going to have protected classes on the basis of race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and national origin, to say you can't fire people for these criteria, well, then I think we should, if we're going to have them at all, we should add political expression to that list. To say that if you can't fire somebody for being black or gay or Muslim or white or Jewish or Christian or Hindu or whatever, that you should not be able to fire them for being an outspoken conservative or an outspoken liberal, for that matter either. We should apply that standard even-handedly. And the critiques I got were from libertarians who say that, self-professed libertarians at least, who say, no, that's intervention in the free market. The market should sort this out, that if these businesses are firing these great conservatives over here, then that's a business opportunity for these other businesses over there to hire them instead. And that we should not want to burden businesses with regulations deciding who they can and cannot fire or associate themselves with. At my core, I'm actually sympathetic to that. But the thing that's disappointing to me is that you can't have it both ways, actually. And in fact, it was the intervention in the market by creating the protected classes, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. Those protected classes are actually what created the viewpoint discrimination we see in the private sector. Per the deep state's interpretation of it and application of those regulations now to companies, it also means that you cannot create what they call a hostile work environment for those protected classes. Well, how does one create a hostile work environment? Let's talk about it. Real case of a grandmother who wore a red sweater every Friday to work to celebrate veterans and to celebrate our troops. And she had a little group that got together on Fridays for lunch at the office to do it. A member of a protected class complained to HR, claiming that that was a microaggression, that created a hostile work environment. So they talk to the lady and they say, hey, we don't want you doing this in the workplace anymore. She didn't like it, but she said, okay, fine. She still wears a red sweater to work on Fridays, and then she hangs it on the back of her chair at work. Well, that's still apparently a vestige of the microaggression, at which point they had her remove that. Do you want reform or do you want revolution? I think this is a moment for revolution, and we need nothing short of one in order to actually salvage what this country was founded on.